There was great excitement in our household early this morning because today was the day new Advent calendars could finally be opened. Among the number of reusable calendars we have, there is also the addition of new chocolate-oriented calendars to be indulged in. I'm not sure just where chocolate sits in terms of the theology of Advent, but I do know that its presence certainly brought heightened levels of Advent joy to certain members of the family. This year is unusual in that the first day of Advent, which is always the first Sunday of Advent, actually coincides with this first day when we can open little doors on Advent calendars. Advent Sunday only falls on December the 1st, once or twice every decade. What this means is that in every other year, you either have to wait a day or two before beginning your Advent calendar, or that you have already started your Advent calendar by the time Advent Sunday arrives. Advent calendars serve two purposes, depending on your perspective. If you are a parent, the use of an Advent calendar is to stop children asking, "How much longer? How long do we have to wait?" If you are a child, Advent calendars might answer that question of just how much longer until Christmas, but in doing so, they also become an excruciating reminder of just how slowly December can seem to creep by. So yes, relief for parents, mild torture for children. Advent calendars appear to have arisen in Germany in the mid-19th century and originally used candles or chalk markings as a way of counting down the days of Advent. And historically, these calendars would always begin on today, Advent Sunday. That was until the mother of a young man named Gerard Lang decided to innovate a new version of the calendars she made for her son. She was the first, as far as we know, to include a sweet for each day of Advent. You see, as it happens, as an adult, Gerard Lang became a publisher, and he was the first person to mass produce Advent calendars. Very early in this publishing endeavour, Lang realised he had a particular problem. The days of Advent changed every year. What would happen if he failed to sell all of the calendars he had made for this year? He would have to dump the leftover stock, because Advent the following year would begin on a different day and have a different number of days. That was until Gerard realised he could actually just ignore the actual days of Advent completely and simply standardise his calendars to 25 windows, thereby making sure he never had the problem of underselling his product. So for the Advent purists out there, enjoy this year when we can blissfully begin your Advent calendar on the first official day of Advent. I'm sure the rest of us are simply happy to start our calendars on December the 1st, regardless of when it falls. If there is one thing that irks me about the season we are beginning today, it is that each year a certain section of society loves to debate the right way and the wrong way of how to do Advent and Christmas properly. On occasion, I have been guilty of joining in, because let's face it, Christmas decorations sitting right next to the Halloween costumes at the supermarket is a somewhat ridiculous sight. That said, I will make a small confession that my birthday, which happened on September the 25th, was a day on which I did eat a marshmallow Santa Claus. There is a point where strict observance of traditions, whatever those traditions are believed to be, actually gets in the way of what the traditions are trying to express. And sometimes our tradition themselves have become so distorted and convoluted that they aren't necessarily helpful to us anyway. Advent is often described as a season of waiting. Ask anyone who has an Advent calendar and they will tell you Advent is about waiting. And they are right, at least in part. A deeper question is to ask, in Advent, what is it that we are waiting for? The word Advent itself does in part mean coming, as in something is coming. We are waiting for something to arrive. Who here thinks it's Christmas that we're waiting for? Would anyone dare to suggest maybe it's something else? A few knowing looks out there. Traditionally, the readings on the first 2 Sundays of Advent direct our attention not to the coming of Christ at Christmas, but rather to the idea of Christ returning at the end of time. And yes, there is some well-trodden theology along the lines of, we had better get our act together because we just don't know when Jesus might turn up. It's an idea that suggests, to some extent, that we're all naughty children mucking around in a classroom, and we should be behaving better because Jesus might just turn up at any moment and catch us. Of course, with that idea lies the implication of punishment. Punishment, never a particularly helpful theological concept, and frankly, there are better motivations for being good than the threat of getting into trouble. But this idea of waiting expectantly for the end of days is problematic for, well, I'm going to say another reason, but there are many reasons. I will talk about one. For many, this particular theological idea can lull people into a kind of apathy. After all, Jesus will eventually return, and surely he's the one to sort things out. All we need to do is keep our noses clean in the meantime. Dare I say it, sometimes waiting is not the virtuous thing we make it out to be. And this is really the thought that kept coming up for me as I reflected on today's readings. To what extent does patience, waiting, and looking forward to something in the future actually get in the way of the Christian message? Our weekly readings often attempt to draw together a particular theme. In the case of today, one such theme is the idea of Advent being a time of waiting for Christ's return. and I accept that this particular theme is a small part of the biblical narrative, but I would argue that it is not as pervasive as church tradition often leads us to believe. I believe that the stronger theme present in both the teaching of Christ and of Paul is the suggestion that our attention should always be directed towards what is going on in our lives right here, right now. The vast majority of the Bible is concerned with human life and our experience of God in the everyday world. Laws, parables, epistles are all primarily concerned with how we love God and love each other in this life. In fact, when Jesus spoke of the coming of God's reign, he always drew attention to the way God's reign is being expressed in this world, now. God's reign is not something for us to wait for. It is already creeping into this world, right under our noses. I can't help but wonder if Jesus turned up right now and asked us what it was we were celebrating on this particular Sunday, and we responded by telling him that this is the first Sunday of Advent, a season of waiting, that he might be a little bit confused. What is it you are waiting for? Maybe this year, the task of Advent is not to wait in anticipation for Christ's coming, be it at Christmas or some far-off imagined future. Maybe we need to reflect on why we choose to wait at all. Perhaps there are things we shouldn't be waiting for. There is a climate crisis in our world that needs urgent attention. Inequality increases minute by minute. Submissions to the Treaty Principles Bill close on January the 7th, leaving us little time to make our voices heard. Now is not the time to wait. We don't need to wait for a great many things. We do not need to wait for Christmas Day to share the joy of God's appearance on earth in the form of a human child. We don't need to wait for Good Friday to speak of the love of God that withholds nothing. We don't need to wait for yet another Easter to speak of a love for each of us so great that it could not be defeated by torture and death. And we certainly do not need to hold back from loving each other within this community as well as those beyond this community. God's reign has already begun. The challenge is to live each day as if we truly believe that. Amen.